Question 1. What factors determine the appropriate course of action when a potential data breach is detected within a VMware cloud on AWS environment, impacting customer data subject to specific regional data sovereignty laws? Option A. The immediate impact on service availability and the urgency of restoring full functionality for all affected customers. Option B. The specific data sovereignty laws applicable to the customer's data, the contractual obligations with the customer, and the established incident response plan that includes data handling protocols. Option C. The perceived severity of the breach based on initial alerts, regardless of the specific data classification or regulatory requirements. Option D. The cost-effectiveness of immediate data isolation measures versus the potential cost of a prolonged investigation. The correct answer is A. The immediate impact on service availability and the urgency of restoring full functionality for all affected customers. Explanation. The scenario presents a common ethical dilemma in cloud environments, particularly when dealing with sensitive data and potential compliance breaches. The challenge lies in balancing the immediate need to address a security vulnerability with the long-term implications of data handling and regulatory adherence. Professionals must navigate the complexities of data sovereignty, privacy regulations, and contractual obligations with the cloud provider. The correct approach prioritizes a thorough understanding of the regulatory landscape and contractual agreements before taking action. This ensures that any remediation steps are compliant with relevant laws and do not inadvertently violate data protection principles or service-level agreements. It reflects best professional practice by emphasizing due diligence, risk assessment, and informed decision-making, aligning with principles of data stewardship and responsible cloud usage. An incorrect approach that immediately isolates or deletes data without proper authorization or investigation risks violating data retention policies, contractual obligations with the customer, and potentially data privacy regulations if the data is not properly handled or secured during the isolation process. Another incorrect approach that involves immediate public disclosure without a full understanding of the breach's scope or impact could lead to reputational damage, loss of customer trust, and potential legal repercussions for failing to manage sensitive information appropriately. Lastly, an approach that solely relies on the cloud provider's recommendations without independent verification or consideration of the customer's specific compliance requirements overlooks the shared responsibility model and the need for the customer to maintain oversight of their data. Professionals should employ a structured decision-making process that begins with identifying the nature and scope of the potential issue. This is followed by consulting relevant regulatory frameworks, e.g., GDPR, CCPA, HIPAA, depending on the data type and customer location, reviewing contractual agreements with the cloud provider and the customer, and assessing the potential impact on data confidentiality, integrity, and availability. Collaboration with legal and compliance teams is crucial, as is clear communication with the customer to ensure transparency and alignment on remediation strategies. Question 2. When evaluating a customer's urgent request for direct, elevated access to their VMware cloud on AWS environment outside of standard operational hours to troubleshoot a critical production issue, what is the most appropriate course of action for a VMware cloud on AWS master specialist? Option A. Initiate the documented emergency change management procedure, which includes a rapid risk assessment, obtaining necessary approvals via alternative channels and strict post-incident review. Option B. Politely decline the request, explaining that all access must follow the documented change management and approval process, and offer to initiate that process immediately. Option C. Escalate the request directly to a senior manager for a decision without performing an initial assessment of the request's security implications. Option D. Grant the requested access immediately to expedite the troubleshooting process, with a commitment to document and review the access post-resolution. The correct answer is D. Grant the requested access immediately to expedite the troubleshooting process, with a commitment to document and review the access post-resolution. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a customer's request for immediate, potentially unauthorized access to sensitive VMware cloud on AWS infrastructure, and the IT professional's responsibility to maintain security, compliance, and operational integrity. The urgency of the customer's business need, coupled with the potential for significant financial loss if not addressed, creates pressure to bypass standard procedures. However, deviating from established security protocols and access control mechanisms can expose the environment to significant risks, including data breaches, unauthorized modifications, and compliance violations. The professional must balance the customer's immediate concerns with the long-term security and stability of the cloud environment. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves adhering strictly to the established change management and access control policies for VMware Cloud on AWS. This means verifying the customer's identity and authorization, documenting the request thoroughly, assessing the potential security and operational impact of granting the requested access, and obtaining the necessary approvals from relevant stakeholders, e.g., security team, compliance officer, account management. If the request is deemed critical and cannot wait for the standard approval process, a documented emergency change procedure, which still involves risk assessment and post-event review, should be followed. This approach upholds the principles of least privilege, accountability, and due diligence, which are fundamental to secure cloud operations and are implicitly or explicitly covered by VMware's best practices and any relevant regulatory frameworks governing cloud service providers and their customers. Incorrect approaches analysis. Granting immediate, undocumented access without proper authorization or risk assessment is a significant regulatory and ethical failure. It violates the principle of least privilege, creating an unnecessary security vulnerability. This could lead to unauthorized data access or modification, which would be a direct breach of data protection regulations, e.g., GDPR, CCPA, depending on the jurisdiction of the customer and data. It also undermines the integrity of the audit trail, making it impossible to track who made changes and when, which is critical for compliance and incident response. Attempting to fulfill the request by circumventing established security controls, even with the intention of rectifying it later, is also professionally unacceptable. This demonstrates a disregard for established security policies and procedures, which are in place to protect the integrity and confidentiality of the customer's data and the VMware Cloud on AWS environment. Such actions can lead to unintended consequences, such as misconfigurations or security gaps that are difficult to detect and remediate. It also sets a dangerous precedent for future requests. Escalating the request to a superior without first attempting to understand the full scope and potential impact, or without proposing a compliant solution, is an abdication of professional responsibility. While escalation is sometimes necessary, it should be done with a clear understanding of the situation and a proposed course of action, not as a way to avoid making a difficult decision or performing due diligence. This approach fails to demonstrate proactive problem-solving and adherence to established operational procedures. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a structured decision-making process that prioritizes security and compliance. This involves 1. Understanding the request. Clearly define what the customer is asking for and why it is urgent. 2. Policy review. Consult relevant VMware Cloud on AWS documentation, security policies, and any applicable regulatory guidelines. 3. Risk assessment. Evaluate the potential security, operational, and compliance risks associated with fulfilling the request. 4. Solution development. Identify compliant and secure methods to address the customer's need, even if it requires a deviation from the norm, e.g., emergency change process. 5. Communication and documentation. Clearly communicate the proposed solution, risks, and required approvals to the customer and relevant internal stakeholders. Document all steps taken and decisions made. 6. Execution and verification. Implement the approved solution and verify its effectiveness and security. Question 3. Operational review demonstrates a potential security gap in the proposed VMware Cloud on AWS architecture related to data ingress filtering for specific sensitive data types. As a VMware Cloud on AWS Master Specialist, what is the most appropriate immediate course of action to ensure both migration timelines and robust security? Option A. Immediately halt the migration process and inform senior management of the security gap without providing any technical analysis or proposed solutions. Option B. Conduct a detailed security assessment of the data ingress filtering gap within the VMware Cloud on AWS environment, evaluating the impact and exploring native NSXT firewalling capabilities, and other relevant security controls to propose a targeted mitigation strategy. Option C. Proceed with the migration as planned, assuming the existing security measures are sufficient and the identified gap is a low-priority concern. Option D. Implement a generic, third-party security appliance at the network edge to filter incoming data, assuming it will address the identified gap without specific validation for VMware Cloud on AWS. Correct answer is B. Conduct a detailed security assessment of the data ingress filtering gap within the VMware Cloud on AWS environment, evaluating the impact and exploring native NSXT firewalling capabilities and other relevant security controls to propose a targeted mitigation strategy. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in cloud migration projects where the operational team identifies a potential security gap in the proposed VMware Cloud on AWS architecture. The challenge lies in balancing the urgency of migration with the imperative to maintain a robust security posture, especially when dealing with sensitive data. The master specialist role demands not only technical expertise in VMware Cloud on AWS, but also a deep understanding of security best practices and the ability to translate technical findings into actionable recommendations that align with organizational risk tolerance and regulatory compliance. The pressure to meet migration timelines can lead to shortcuts, making a thorough, risk-based assessment crucial. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a detailed security assessment of the identified gap, focusing on the specific implications for VMware Cloud on AWS. This includes evaluating the impact on data confidentiality, integrity, and availability within the cloud environment. Best professional practice dictates a proactive risk mitigation strategy. This means understanding the specific VMware Cloud on AWS security controls available, e.g., NSXT firewalling, encryption at rest and in transit, identity and access management integration, and determining if they can adequately address the identified gap. If native controls are insufficient, the next step is to explore compensating controls or architectural adjustments that maintain compliance with relevant security standards and VMware's recommended practices for the platform. This approach prioritizes security without unnecessarily delaying the migration by seeking solutions that are both effective and integrated with the VMware Cloud on AWS ecosystem. Incorrect approaches analysis. Ignoring the identified security gap and proceeding with the migration without further investigation is a critical regulatory and ethical failure. This directly violates the principle of due diligence in security and could lead to breaches of data protection regulations, such as those governing the handling of sensitive information. It demonstrates a disregard for risk management and a failure to uphold the organization's responsibility to protect its data. Implementing a generic, non-specific security control without assessing its suitability for VMware Cloud on AWS, also professionally unacceptable. This approach lacks the necessary technical due diligence. It might introduce new vulnerabilities or fail to address the root cause of the identified gap, leading to a false sense of security. Furthermore, it could result in non-compliance if the chosen control does not meet the specific requirements of the VMware Cloud on AWS environment or relevant industry standards. Escalating the issue to senior management without providing a technical assessment and proposed solutions is an inefficient use of resources and demonstrates a lack of problem-solving initiative. While escalation is sometimes necessary, it should be a last resort after attempting to resolve the issue at the technical level. Failing to do so can be seen as a dereliction of duty, as the master specialist is expected to leverage their expertise to propose solutions, not just report problems. This can also lead to delays and increased costs if management has to then engage external consultants to assess the problem. Professional reasoning. Professionals facing such a situation should adopt a structured, risk-based decision-making process. First, thoroughly understand the identified security gap and its potential impact within the context of VMware Cloud on AWS. Second, leverage expertise in VMware Cloud on AWS security features and best practices to determine if existing controls can mitigate the risk. Third, if native controls are insufficient, research and propose specific compensating controls or architectural modifications that are compatible with the platform and meet compliance requirements. Fourth, document all findings, assessments, and proposed solutions clearly. Finally, communicate these findings and recommendations to relevant stakeholders, including management and security teams, to facilitate an informed decision that balances migration objectives with security and compliance imperatives. Question 4. Governance review demonstrates a significant gap between the organization's current IT governance framework and the operational requirements for a proposed VMware cloud on AWS deployment. Stakeholders from security, finance, and operations have expressed differing priorities and concerns regarding data residency, cost management, and integration with existing infrastructure. What is the most appropriate next step to ensure a compliant and effective implementation of VMware Cloud on AWS? Option A. Prioritize the technical migration to VMware Cloud on AWS based on vendor recommendations, deferring detailed governance alignment until after the initial operational phase. Option B. Proceed with the VMware Cloud on AWS deployment using existing governance policies, assuming they are sufficiently adaptable, and address any issues that arise post-implementation. Option C. Initiate a comprehensive stakeholder engagement process to identify and reconcile governance gaps, define clear policies for VMware Cloud on AWS, and establish a phased implementation plan aligned with revised governance. Option D. Delegate the responsibility for adapting governance to the VMware Cloud on AWS project team, allowing them to make unilateral decisions on policy adjustments. The correct answer is C. Initiate a comprehensive stakeholder engagement process to identify and reconcile governance gaps, define clear policies for VMware Cloud on AWS, and establish a phased implementation plan aligned with revised governance. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in cloud adoption where the perceived benefits of a new technology, VMware Cloud on AWS, clash with established governance frameworks and stakeholder expectations. The challenge lies in balancing innovation and agility with the need for compliance, security, and cost control. Different stakeholders will have varying priorities and risk appetites, making consensus difficult. The master specialist must navigate these competing interests while ensuring adherence to the specific regulatory framework, governing VMware Cloud on AWS deployments within the relevant jurisdiction. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach prioritizes a comprehensive review of the existing governance framework and its alignment with the proposed VMware Cloud on AWS implementation. This involves engaging all relevant stakeholders, including IT operations, security, finance, and business units, to understand their concerns and requirements. The focus should be on identifying any gaps or conflicts between current policies and the operational realities of VMware Cloud on AWS. This aligns with best practices for cloud governance, which emphasize a proactive, risk-based approach to ensure that new cloud services are deployed and managed in a secure, compliant, and cost-effective manner. Specifically, within the context of the 5V0-1121 exam, this implies understanding how VMware Cloud on AWS integrates with existing enterprise security controls, data residency requirements, and operational procedures, all while adhering to any specific VMware or AWS compliance certifications relevant to the jurisdiction. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach would be to proceed with the VMware Cloud on AWS implementation without a thorough review of the governance framework. This bypasses critical risk assessment and stakeholder alignment, potentially leading to security vulnerabilities, compliance breaches, and uncontrolled costs. Fails to uphold the principle of due diligence required in adopting new technologies, especially those with significant architectural implications like VMware Cloud on AWS. Another incorrect approach would be to solely focus on the technical capabilities of VMware Cloud on AWS without considering the broader governance implications. This narrow focus ignores the essential aspects of operational readiness, financial oversight, and legal compliance, which are integral to a successful and sustainable cloud deployment. It demonstrates a lack of understanding of the holistic nature of cloud governance. A third incorrect approach would be to implement the VMware Cloud on AWS solution based on assumptions about existing governance without explicit validation. This reliance on assumptions can lead to misinterpretations of requirements and the implementation of controls that are either insufficient or overly burdensome, ultimately undermining the intended benefits of the cloud migration. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a structured, stakeholder-centric approach to cloud governance. This involves 1. Understanding the business objectives driving the VMware cloud on AWS adoption. 2. Conducting a thorough assessment of the existing governance framework and identifying potential conflicts or gaps. 3. Engaging all relevant stakeholders to gather requirements, address concerns, and build consensus. 4. Developing a clear cloud governance strategy that outlines policies, procedures, and responsibilities for the VMware cloud on AWS environment. 5. Implementing appropriate controls and monitoring mechanisms to ensure ongoing compliance and operational effectiveness. 6. Regularly reviewing and updating the governance framework as the cloud environment evolves. Question 5. The risk matrix shows a significant number of potential vulnerabilities related to network segmentation and access control within the VMware cloud on AWS environment, stemming from the organization's legacy on-premises security policies. Which of the following stakeholder-driven approaches best addresses these findings while adhering to the VMware cloud on AWS shared responsibility model? Option A. Immediately implement all existing on-premises network segmentation and access control policies within VMware Cloud on AWS, regardless of cloud-native capabilities or potential operational inefficiencies. Option B. Focus solely on cost optimization by disabling security controls identified as potentially redundant in the risk matrix, without a comprehensive review of their necessity in the cloud context. Option C. Conduct a joint workshop with security, operations, and compliance teams to map existing policies to the shared responsibility model, identify necessary adaptations for VMware Cloud on AWS, and prioritize remediation based on risk assessment and business impact. Option D. Delegate all network segmentation and access control responsibilities to VMware and AWS, assuming their default configurations fully meet organizational security requirements. The correct answer is C. Conduct a joint workshop with security, operations, and compliance teams to map existing policies to the shared responsibility model, identify necessary adaptations for VMware Cloud on AWS, and prioritize remediation based on risk assessment and business impact. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in VMware Cloud on AWS deployments where the organization's existing security policies, designed for on-premises environments, may not directly translate to the cloud's shared responsibility model and dynamic nature. The challenge lies in balancing the need for robust security with the operational agility and cost-effectiveness that VMware Cloud on AWS offers. Stakeholders, particularly those accustomed to traditional IT infrastructure, may resist changes that appear to reduce their direct control or increase perceived complexity, even if those changes are necessary for cloud security best practices. The risk matrix highlights potential vulnerabilities, but the interpretation and remediation require a nuanced understanding of cloud-native security controls and the specific responsibilities of VMware and AWS. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a collaborative review and adaptation of existing security policies to align with the VMware Cloud on AWS shared responsibility model. This means identifying which security controls are managed by VMware, which are managed by AWS, and which remain the customer's responsibility. Best professional practice dictates engaging with all relevant stakeholders' security teams, operations, compliance, and business units to ensure buy-in and a shared understanding of the security posture. This approach leverages the inherent security features of VMware Cloud on AWS, while ensuring compliance with organizational standards and regulatory requirements. It prioritizes a risk-based strategy, focusing remediation efforts on the most critical identified risks, and advocates for a phased implementation of policy updates to minimize disruption. This aligns with the principle of least privilege and defense in depth, adapted for the cloud context. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to rigidly enforce existing on-premises security policies without modification. This fails to acknowledge the shared responsibility model of VMware Cloud on AWS, leading to either gaps in security, if policies are too lax for the cloud, or unnecessary operational overhead and cost, if policies are overly restrictive and not cloud-native. Its approach ignores the specific security capabilities and responsibilities defined by VMware and AWS, potentially leading to noncompliance and increased risk. Another incorrect approach is to solely rely on VMware and AWS to manage all security aspects without active customer involvement. This abdicates the customer's responsibility in the shared model and can lead to misconfigurations, unaddressed vulnerabilities, and noncompliance with organizational or industry-specific regulations. It overlooks the critical need for the customer to define and enforce their own security requirements and monitor their cloud environment. A third incorrect approach is to prioritize immediate cost savings by disabling or circumventing security controls identified in the risk matrix, assuming they are not critical or are redundant. This is a direct violation of risk management principles and regulatory obligations. It demonstrates a lack of due diligence and a failure to adequately assess the potential impact of security breaches, which can have severe financial, reputational, and legal consequences. Professional reasoning. Professionals should approach this scenario by first understanding the shared responsibility model specific to VMware Cloud on AWS. This involves consulting official VMware and AWS documentation regarding security responsibilities. Next, conduct a thorough gap analysis between existing organizational security policies and the capabilities and responsibilities within VMware Cloud on AWS. Engage all relevant stakeholders in a working group to discuss the risk matrix findings, interpret them within the cloud context, and collaboratively develop a revised security strategy. Prioritize remediation based on the severity of risks identified in the matrix and the potential impact on business operations and compliance. Implement changes in a controlled, phased manner, with clear communication and training for affected teams. Continuous monitoring and regular reviews of the security posture are essential to adapt to evolving threats and platform updates. Question 6. System analysis indicates a client operating in a highly regulated industry has requested a temporary reduction in security logging levels within their VMware Cloud on AWS environment to achieve immediate cost savings. As a master specialist, what is the most appropriate decision-making approach to address this request, considering the paramount importance of regulatory compliance and data integrity? Option A. Inform the client that their request cannot be fulfilled due to the inherent security risks and regulatory noncompliance, without offering any alternative solutions or further discussion. Option B. Agree to the logging reduction as requested, documenting the client's verbal consent, and assume the responsibility for re-enabling full logging at a later, unspecified date. Option C. Conduct a thorough risk assessment to identify the specific compliance implications of reduced logging, present these findings to the client, and propose alternative, compliant cost optimization strategies while maintaining essential security logging. Option D. Immediately implement the client's request to reduce logging levels to demonstrate responsiveness to their financial concerns, with a plan to re-enable full logging once the cost-saving period has passed. The correct answer is C. Conduct a thorough risk assessment to identify the specific compliance implications of reduced logging, present these findings to the client, and propose alternative, compliant cost optimization strategies while maintaining essential security logging. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge stemming from a conflict between a client's perceived immediate need for cost savings and the long-term strategic benefits of a robust, compliant VMware Cloud on AWS architecture. The client's request to bypass certain security configurations for a temporary cost reduction, while seemingly straightforward from a financial perspective, directly impacts the security posture and compliance adherence of the deployed solution. The specialist must navigate this pressure while upholding professional responsibilities and adhering to the regulatory framework governing VMware Cloud on AWS deployments. The challenge lies in balancing client satisfaction with the imperative to maintain a secure and compliant environment, which is paramount in cloud deployments. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a thorough assessment of the client's request against the established security and compliance requirements for VMware Cloud on AWS. This includes understanding the specific regulatory framework applicable to the client's industry and data, and how the proposed deviation would impact adherence. Best professional practice dictates prioritizing security and compliance over short-term cost savings. This means clearly articulating the risks associated with bypassing security controls explaining the potential regulatory repercussions, e.g., fines, loss of certifications, reputational damage, and proposing alternative compliant cost optimization strategies. This approach upholds the integrity of the VMware cloud on AWS deployment, protects the client from potential liabilities, and reinforces the specialist's role as a trusted advisor committed to best practices. Incorrect approach is analysis. Implementing the client's request without a comprehensive risk assessment and clear communication of consequences represents a significant regulatory and ethical failure. It demonstrates a disregard for the security and compliance mandates inherent in cloud environments, potentially exposing the client to data breaches and noncompliance penalties. This approach prioritizes immediate client appeasement over long-term security and regulatory adherence, undermining the specialist's professional credibility and potentially leading to severe repercussions for both the client and the specialist's organization. Another incorrect approach would be to unilaterally refuse the request without providing a detailed explanation of the risks and offering compliant alternatives. While the intention might be to protect the client, this can be perceived as uncooperative and may damage the client relationship. A more professional approach involves collaborative problem solving, where the specialist educates the client on the implications of their request and works with them to find solutions that meet both their financial goals and security/compliance obligations. A third incorrect approach involves agreeing to the request with the intention of rectifying it later without explicit client acknowledgement and documented risk acceptance. This is a deceptive practice that creates a false sense of security and compliance, and it leaves the organization vulnerable to audits and potential discovery of the non-compliant state. Professional integrity demands transparency and adherence to established protocols at all times. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a structured decision-making framework that begins with understanding the core requirements and constraints of the engagement, including the specific regulatory landscape. When faced with a client request that appears to conflict with these requirements, the framework should involve 1. Information gathering, fully understanding the client's request and the underlying business drivers. 2. Risk assessment, evaluating the technical, security, and regulatory implications of the request. 3. Compliance verification, cross-referencing the request against all applicable laws, regulations, and VMware Cloud on AWS best practices. 4. Solution exploration, identifying compliant alternatives that address the client's needs. 5. Communication and recommendation, clearly articulating the risks, benefits, and recommended course of action to the client, ensuring they understand the implications of their decision. 6. Documentation, thoroughly documenting all discussions, decisions, and risk acceptances. This systematic approach ensures that decisions are informed, defensible, and aligned with professional and regulatory obligations. Question 7. Process analysis reveals a critical need to optimize operational costs for a VMware Cloud on AWS deployment. A proposed solution offers significant upfront savings, but requires a reduction in logging retention periods, which may impact auditability and incident response capabilities. The specialist must decide whether to proceed with this cost-saving measure. Option A. Immediately implement the cost-saving measure, as vendor-provided solutions are generally designed to meet industry standards and regulatory requirements. Option B. Defer the cost-saving measure and initiate a thorough review with the compliance and security teams to assess the impact of reduced logging retention on regulatory adherence and incident response, exploring alternative cost optimization strategies if necessary. Option C. Proceed with the cost-saving measure, focusing solely on the immediate financial benefits and assuming that the organization's existing security controls are sufficient to mitigate any potential risks. Option D. Prioritize the cost savings by implementing the reduced logging retention, assuming that any potential compliance issues can be addressed reactively if they arise. The correct answer is D. Prioritize the cost savings by implementing the reduced logging retention, assuming that any potential compliance issues can be addressed reactively if they arise. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in cloud adoption projects, balancing the immediate need for cost optimization with the long-term strategic benefits and compliance requirements of a cloud platform like VMware Cloud on AWS. The challenge lies in the potential for short-sighted decisions driven by immediate financial pressures to compromise the integrity and security posture of the deployed environment, which has direct implications for regulatory compliance. The specialist must navigate conflicting priorities and make a decision that aligns with both business objectives and the stringent regulatory framework governing the use of cloud services in this context. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach prioritizes a comprehensive assessment of the regulatory implications and security requirements before committing to a specific cost-saving measure. This aligns with the principle of security by design and compliance by design, which are fundamental to responsible cloud deployment. By engaging with the compliance and security teams, the specialist ensures that any proposed cost optimization strategy is evaluated against the established regulatory framework and security policies. This proactive engagement prevents potential breaches, data mishandling, or non-compliance issues that could lead to significant financial penalties, reputational damage, and operational disruption. It demonstrates a commitment to upholding the highest standards of governance and risk management, which is a cornerstone of professional practice in this domain. Incorrect approach is analysis. Implementing a cost-saving measure without consulting compliance and security teams represents a significant regulatory and ethical failure. This approach prioritizes immediate financial gains over established governance and risk management protocols. It creates a blind spot regarding potential compliance gaps and security vulnerabilities, which could lead to unauthorized access, data exfiltration, or violation of data residency requirements. Such actions are professionally unacceptable as they disregard the specialist's responsibility to protect the organization's assets and ensure adherence to legal and regulatory obligations. Adopting a cost-saving measure solely based on vendor recommendations without independent validation or consideration of the specific regulatory context is also a failure. While vendor recommendations can be valuable, they are not always tailored to the unique compliance landscape of the organization. Relying solely on these recommendations without due diligence can lead to the adoption of solutions that, while cost-effective, may not meet the stringent requirements of the applicable regulatory framework, thus exposing the organization to risk. Focusing exclusively on the lowest upfront cost without considering the total cost of ownership, including potential compliance remediation, security incident response, and long-term operational overhead, is a short-sighted and professionally unsound decision. This approach neglects the broader implications of the chosen solution and can lead to unforeseen expenses and risks down the line, undermining the initial cost-saving objective and potentially creating greater financial and operational burdens. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this field should employ a decision-making framework that integrates risk assessment, regulatory compliance, and strategic alignment. This framework involves 1. Understanding the regulatory landscape, thoroughly comprehending all applicable laws, regulations, and industry standards relevant to VMware Cloud on AWS deployments. 2. Stakeholder engagement, proactively involving compliance, security, legal, and business units in the decision-making process. 3. Risk assessment, identifying potential risks associated with any proposed solution, including financial, operational, security, and compliance risks. 4. Solution evaluation, assessing solutions not only on cost, but also on their ability to meet security and compliance requirements, scalability, and long-term viability. 5. Documentation and justification, clearly documenting the decision-making process, the rationale behind the chosen approach, and the mitigation strategies for identified risks. This systematic approach ensures that decisions are well-informed, defensible, and aligned with the organization's overall objectives and regulatory obligations. Question 8. Strategic planning requires a comprehensive approach to resolving performance degradation in a critical application hosted on VMware Cloud on AWS, following a recent migration. Given the complexity of the managed service, what is the most appropriate initial course of action to diagnose and rectify the issue? Option A. Scale up the underlying virtual machine compute resources for the application, anticipating that increased processing power will resolve the degradation. Option B. Attempt to directly access and modify the underlying physical network or storage infrastructure components managed by VMware to identify and fix the problem. Option C. Immediately reconfigure network security group rules to allow broader traffic flow, assuming network latency is the primary cause of the performance issue. Option D. Initiate a deep dive into VMware Cloud on AWS native logging and monitoring tools, correlating application behavior with infrastructure metrics, and engage VMware Global Support Services for expert analysis and guidance. The correct answer is D. Initiate a deep dive into VMware Cloud on AWS native logging and monitoring tools, correlating application behavior with infrastructure metrics, and engage VMware Global Support Services for expert analysis and guidance. Explanation: Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in cloud adoption, where critical business applications performance is degrading post-migration to VMware Cloud on AWS. The challenge lies in balancing the immediate need for resolution with the long-term implications of architectural decisions and adherence to VMware's best practices and the underlying regulatory framework for cloud services. The pressure to restore service quickly can lead to hasty, suboptimal solutions that might violate compliance or introduce future technical debt. The specialist must navigate technical troubleshooting, vendor support, and potential architectural compromises, while remaining within the defined operational and compliance boundaries of VMware Cloud on AWS. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a systematic, data-driven investigation that prioritizes understanding the root cause within the VMware Cloud on AWS environment. This aligns with the principles of responsible cloud management and adherence to the operational guidelines and best practices inherent in the VMware Cloud on AWS Master Specialist Framework. Specifically, it emphasizes leveraging VMware's native diagnostic tools and engaging with VMware support, which is crucial for maintaining the integrity of the managed service and ensuring compliance with the service level agreements, SLAs, and security postures defined by VMware. This methodical approach minimizes the risk of introducing further instability or non-compliance by addressing the issue at its source, within the defined operational boundaries of the platform. Incorrect approaches analysis. Implementing a quick fix by reconfiguring network security groups without a thorough understanding of the application's traffic patterns and the implications for VMware Cloud on AWS networking is a significant regulatory and ethical failure. It bypasses proper change management and risk assessment, potentially creating security vulnerabilities or disrupting other services, which violates the principle of maintaining a secure and stable environment as mandated by cloud service provider guidelines. Another incorrect approach is to immediately scale up compute resources without diagnosing the performance bottleneck. This is a costly and inefficient solution that fails to address the underlying issue. From a regulatory and ethical standpoint, it represents a failure in resource optimization and responsible financial management, potentially leading to unnecessary expenditure that could be scrutinized under cost governance policies. Finally, attempting to bypass VMware support and directly modify underlying infrastructure components is a critical failure. VMware Cloud on AWS is a managed service, and unauthorized modifications can lead to service disruption, voiding support agreements, and violating the terms of service. This directly contravenes the operational framework and security protocols established by VMware, posing a significant compliance risk. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a structured decision-making framework that begins with clear problem definition, followed by hypothesis generation and testing. This involves gathering all relevant data, consulting documentation and vendor support, and evaluating potential solutions against established best practices, compliance requirements, and business objectives. The framework should prioritize root cause analysis over symptom treatment and ensure that any remediation steps are documented, tested, and approved through appropriate change control processes. In the context of VMware Cloud on AWS, this means always operating within the defined management plane and leveraging VMware's expertise and support channels. Question 9. Process analysis reveals that a critical business application deployed on VMware Cloud on AWS is experiencing intermittent performance degradation following a recent migration. Users are reporting slow response times and occasional timeouts. What is the most appropriate initial approach to diagnose and resolve this issue? Option A. Implement aggressive network tuning on the VMware Cloud on AWS environment, assuming network latency is the primary cause of the performance degradation, without first gathering specific network performance data. Option B. Initiate a comprehensive performance baseline analysis of the application in its new VMware Cloud on AWS environment, correlating application logs, user-reported issues, and VMware Cloud on AWS resource utilization metrics, CPU, memory, network, storage to identify potential bottlenecks. Option C. Focus solely on addressing user complaints by adjusting application-level configurations based on anecdotal feedback, assuming the underlying infrastructure is performing as expected. Option D. Immediately roll back the application to its previous on-premises environment, as the migration has clearly introduced performance issues that cannot be quickly resolved. The correct answer is B. Initiate a comprehensive performance baseline analysis of the application in its new VMware Cloud on AWS environment, correlating application logs, user-reported issues, and VMware Cloud on AWS resource utilization metrics, CPU, memory, network, storage, to identify potential bottlenecks. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in cloud adoption projects where a critical business application's performance is unexpectedly degraded after migration to VMware Cloud on AWS. The challenge lies in balancing the urgency of restoring service with the need for a systematic, evidence-based approach to problem resolution, all while adhering to the specific compliance and operational guidelines mandated by the 5v0-11. 21 VMware Cloud on AWS Master Specialist Framework. The pressure to quickly resolve the issue can lead to hasty decisions that might overlook root causes or introduce new risks. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a structured, phased investigation that prioritizes data gathering and analysis before implementing solutions. This aligns with best practices for incident management and problem resolution within regulated environments. Specifically, it emphasizes understanding the application's baseline performance, analyzing VMware Cloud on AWS resource utilization, CPU, memory, network, storage, and correlating these metrics with application logs and user-reported issues. This methodical approach ensures that the identified solution addresses the actual root cause, rather than a symptom, thereby preventing recurrence and maintaining service integrity. This is crucial for demonstrating due diligence and adherence to operational excellence standards expected in a master specialist role. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to immediately assume the issue is solely with the VMware Cloud on AWS infrastructure and begin making broad configuration changes without sufficient data. This violates the principle of least privilege and can lead to unintended consequences, potentially exacerbating the problem or causing new ones. It also fails to consider that the root cause might lie within the application itself or its interaction with the new environment. Another incorrect approach is to revert the entire migration without a thorough investigation. While seemingly a quick fix, this bypasses the opportunity to learn from the migration and resolve the underlying performance bottleneck. It represents a failure to leverage the capabilities of VMware Cloud on AWS and a lack of commitment to optimizing the cloud environment, which is contrary to the objectives of adopting such a platform. A third incorrect approach is to focus solely on user complaints without correlating them with objective performance metrics. While user experience is paramount, anecdotal evidence alone is insufficient for accurate diagnosis. This approach risks misattributing the problem and implementing solutions that do not address the technical root cause, leading to continued performance degradation and potential compliance issues if service-level agreements, SLAs, are not met. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this domain should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes a systematic, data-driven approach to problem-solving. This involves 1. Incident identification and prioritization, clearly defining the problem and its impact. 2. Data gathering and analysis, collecting relevant metrics from the application, operating system, and the VMware Cloud on AWS environment. 3. Root cause analysis, using the gathered data to pinpoint the fundamental reason for the performance degradation. 4. Solution design and implementation, developing and applying targeted solutions based on the root cause. 5. Verification and monitoring, confirming the resolution and continuously monitoring performance to prevent recurrence. This framework ensures that decisions are informed, effective, and compliant with operational best practices. Question 10. The risk matrix shows a high-impact, medium probability risk associated with application performance degradation post-migration to VMware Cloud on AWS. Following the initial deployment, users report significant latency, impacting a critical financial reporting application. What is the most professional and effective immediate next step to address this situation? Option A. Instruct the cloud operations team to aggressively over-provision compute and storage resources in VMware Cloud on AWS for the affected application to mitigate potential resource contention. Option B. Formally document a complaint against the VMware Cloud on AWS provider, citing performance issues without conducting an internal root cause analysis. Option C. Immediately roll back the application to the on-premises environment to restore normal operations and defer the cloud migration for this application until further notice. Option D. Initiate a deep dive investigation into the network path, resource utilization within VMware Cloud on AWS, and application-specific performance metrics, while simultaneously engaging VMware Global Support Services for expert assistance. The correct answer is D. Initiate a deep dive investigation into the network path, resource utilization within VMware Cloud on AWS, and application-specific performance metrics, while simultaneously engaging VMware Global Support Services for expert assistance. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in cloud adoption projects where a critical business application's performance is impacted by latency introduced by the migration to VMware Cloud on AWS. The challenge lies in balancing the benefits of cloud migration, scalability, cost efficiency, agility, against the immediate, tangible negative impact on a core business function. The pressure to deliver the project on time and within budget, coupled with the potential for significant business disruption, necessitates a robust decision-making framework that prioritizes both technical feasibility and business continuity. The Master Specialist designation implies a need for advanced problem-solving and strategic thinking beyond basic technical implementation. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a structured, data-driven investigation to pinpoint the root cause of the latency. This aligns with best professional practices for IT service management and cloud governance. Specifically, it requires leveraging VMware Cloud on AWS's monitoring tools and potentially integrating with application-level diagnostics to understand the network path, resource utilization on both the on-premises and cloud environments, and application behavior. The decision to engage with VMware support and potentially the application vendor is crucial for a comprehensive analysis. This methodical approach ensures that any proposed solution is based on accurate diagnosis, minimizing the risk of implementing ineffective or costly workarounds. It also demonstrates due diligence in managing a critical cloud migration project, adhering to principles of service assurance and risk mitigation inherent in IT best practices. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to immediately revert to the on-premises environment without a thorough investigation. This represents a failure in problem solving and a potential abandonment of the strategic cloud initiative without exhausting all diagnostic avenues. It could lead to significant project delays, wasted investment, and a loss of confidence in cloud technologies. Ethically, it fails to uphold the professional responsibility to find a resolution. Another incorrect approach is to implement a hasty, unverified workaround, such as over-provisioning resources in the cloud, without understanding the underlying cause. This is financially irresponsible and technically unsound. It masks the problem rather than solving it, potentially leading to ongoing performance issues or unexpected costs. This approach violates principles of efficient resource management and sound technical judgment. A third incorrect approach is to blame the cloud provider without sufficient evidence. While vendor support is part of the solution, prematurely assigning fault without a detailed analysis is unprofessional and can damage relationships. It bypasses the necessary steps of internal troubleshooting and data gathering required to effectively engage with support. This demonstrates a lack of analytical rigor and a failure to follow established incident management processes. Professional reasoning. Professionals facing such a scenario should employ a structured decision-making framework. This typically involves 1. Problem identification and scoping. Clearly define the observed issue latency and its impact. 2. Information gathering. Collect all relevant data from monitoring tools, logs, and user feedback. 3. Root cause analysis. Systematically investigate potential causes, starting with the most probable. 4. Solution development. Propose solutions based on the identified root cause. 5. Testing and validation. Implement and test solutions to confirm effectiveness. 6. Decision and implementation. Make an informed decision based on data and implement the chosen solution. 7. Monitoring and review. Continuously monitor performance and review the outcome. Engaging with vendor support. VMware. Application vendor is a critical step within the information gathering and root cause analysis phases, not a substitute for them. Question 11. The assessment process reveals a business unit's urgent request for a new VMware cloud on AWS deployment to support a critical, time-sensitive project. The project timeline is aggressive, and the business unit is pushing for immediate provisioning, citing potential loss of competitive advantage if delayed. However, the standard security and compliance review process for new cloud deployments typically takes several weeks to complete. The specialist is tasked with advising on the best course of action. Option A. Expedite the security and compliance review process by bypassing certain standard checks to accommodate the business unit's urgent timeline. Option B. Initiate the VMware cloud on AWS deployment immediately to meet the business unit's urgent timeline, deferring the formal security and compliance review until after the system is operational. Option C. Proceed with the VMware cloud on AWS deployment, but only after a thorough security and compliance review has been completed and all identified risks have been addressed to the satisfaction of the security and compliance teams. Option D. Inform the business unit that the deployment cannot proceed until the standard security and compliance review is fully completed, even if it means missing their project deadline. The correct answer is B. Initiate the VMware cloud on AWS deployment immediately to meet the business unit's urgent timeline, deferring the formal security and compliance review until after the system is operational. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in cloud environments where the rapid pace of innovation and adoption can outstrip formal governance and compliance processes. The challenge lies in balancing the immediate business need for a new VMware cloud on AWS deployment with the imperative to adhere to established security policies and regulatory requirements. The specialist must navigate potential conflicts between departmental requests and overarching organizational standards, ensuring that the deployment is not only functional, but also secure and compliant. The risk of shadow IT or non-compliant deployments increases when business units feel their needs are not being met promptly by central IT or security teams. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a structured, risk-based assessment that integrates security and compliance considerations from the outset. This aligns with best practices for cloud adoption and is implicitly supported by the principles of responsible IT governance, which are foundational to maintaining a secure and compliant posture. By engaging the security and compliance teams early, the specialist ensures that the proposed deployment adheres to organizational policies, industry standards, and any relevant regulatory mandates, e.g., data residency, access controls, audit logging. This proactive engagement minimizes the risk of costly remediation, security breaches, or compliance violations post-deployment. It demonstrates a commitment to a secure by design and compliant by design methodology, which is crucial for managing complex cloud solutions like VMware Cloud on AWS. Correct approaches analysis. Proceeding with the deployment without a formal security and compliance review introduces significant regulatory and ethical risks. This approach bypasses established governance frameworks, potentially violating internal policies designed to protect sensitive data and maintain operational integrity. It could lead to non-compliance with data protection regulations, such as those governing personal data or financial information, if appropriate controls are not implemented. Ethically, it represents a failure to uphold the organization's duty of care regarding data security and privacy. Prioritizing the departmental request solely based on perceived urgency without considering the security and compliance implications is also a flawed approach. While responsiveness to business needs is important, it cannot come at the expense of security and compliance. This can result in deployments that are vulnerable to attack, do not meet regulatory requirements for data handling, or lack necessary audit trails, leading to potential fines, reputational damage, and operational disruptions. Delaying the security and compliance review until after the deployment is complete is a reactive and inherently risky strategy. It assumes that compliance can be retrofitted, which is often difficult, expensive, and may not fully address all requirements. This approach significantly increases the likelihood of discovering compliance gaps or security vulnerabilities after the system is live, making remediation more complex and potentially impacting business operations. It also demonstrates a lack of foresight and adherence to a proactive security and compliance posture. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes risk assessment and adherence to established governance. When faced with a request for a new VMware cloud on AWS deployment, the initial step should always be to understand the business requirements and the data that will be processed. This understanding should then inform a comprehensive security and compliance review. This review should involve relevant stakeholders, including security architects, compliance officers, and legal counsel, to ensure all potential risks are identified and mitigated. The framework should emphasize a govern early, govern often approach, integrating compliance and security into the entire lifecycle of cloud deployments, from planning and design to operation and decommissioning. This proactive stance is essential for maintaining trust, protecting assets, and ensuring regulatory adherence in dynamic cloud environments. Question 12. Cost-benefit analysis shows that migrating a critical application to VMware Cloud on AWS offers significant operational efficiencies and potential cost reductions. However, the organization operates within a highly regulated industry, requiring strict adherence to data residency and security protocols. Which approach best represents a professionally sound decision-making process for this scenario? Option A. Prioritize the vendor's assurances regarding compliance and security, and implement the migration with minimal additional verification, focusing primarily on the speed of deployment to realize benefits quickly. Option B. Delay the migration indefinitely until a fully on-premises solution can be developed that guarantees absolute control over all compliance aspects, even if it means foregoing significant operational efficiencies. Option C. Proceed with the migration based on the projected cost savings and operational improvements, assuming that VMware Cloud on AWS, as a reputable service, inherently meets all regulatory requirements. Option D. Conduct a thorough due diligence process that includes a detailed assessment of VMware Cloud on AWS's compliance certifications against specific regulatory mandates, a comprehensive risk assessment of data residency and security implications, and an evaluation of the total cost of ownership, including potential compliance remediation efforts. The correct answer is C. Proceed with the migration based on the projected cost savings and operational improvements, assuming that VMware Cloud on AWS, as a reputable service, inherently meets all regulatory requirements. Explanation. The scenario presents a common challenge in cloud adoption, balancing the perceived benefits of a new technology with the inherent risks and compliance obligations. The professional is tasked with evaluating a significant investment in VMware Cloud on AWS, which requires a thorough understanding of the decision-making framework, specifically how to weigh costs against benefits in a regulated environment. The challenge lies in moving beyond a purely technical or financial assessment to incorporate the critical compliance and risk management aspects mandated by the exam's jurisdiction. The correct approach prioritizes a comprehensive, risk-aware evaluation that aligns with the principles of responsible technology adoption and regulatory adherence. It involves a structured decision-making process that explicitly considers the total cost of ownership, including indirect costs like compliance overhead and potential remediation efforts, against the quantifiable and qualitative benefits. This approach is best professional practice because it ensures that the decision is not only economically sound, but also legally and ethically defensible, minimizing the risk of non-compliance and associated penalties. It reflects a mature understanding of the VMware Cloud on AWS Master Specialist role, which extends beyond technical implementation to strategic advisory. Incorrect approaches fail by oversimplifying the decision-making process or by neglecting critical regulatory considerations. Focusing solely on immediate cost savings without a thorough assessment of long-term compliance implications is a significant regulatory failure. This can lead to unforeseen expenses related to audits, data privacy breaches, or service disruptions due to non-compliance. Similarly, prioritizing vendor-driven benefits without independent validation or consideration of the organization's specific risk appetite and regulatory landscape is a failure to exercise due diligence. This can result in adopting a solution that, while technically appealing, does not meet the stringent requirements of the governing framework, leading to potential legal repercussions and reputational damage. Professionals should employ a structured decision-making framework that begins with clearly defining the business objectives and regulatory requirements. This is followed by identifying all potential costs, direct, indirect, and opportunity and benefits, both tangible and intangible. Critical step is the risk assessment, which evaluates the likelihood and impact of non-compliance, security vulnerabilities, and operational disruptions. Finally, the decision should be made based on a holistic evaluation of the risk-adjusted benefits, ensuring alignment with the organization's strategic goals and regulatory obligations. This iterative process allows for informed choices that balance innovation with responsibility. Question 13. The assessment process reveals that the organization is considering a migration to VMware Cloud on AWS for enhanced scalability and agility. However, a critical aspect of the impact assessment is to ensure that the chosen cloud environment fully complies with the stringent data residency and privacy regulations applicable to the financial services sector in the United States. Which of the following approaches would best satisfy these regulatory requirements during the impact assessment? Option A. Thoroughly evaluating the specific data residency options and compliance certifications offered by VMware Cloud on AWS, and mapping these directly against the relevant U.S. financial services regulations, e.g., GLBA, state-specific data privacy laws, and the organization's data classification policies. Option B. Prioritizing the assessment of VMware Cloud on AWS's disaster recovery capabilities, and assuming that its inherent resilience will satisfy all data residency and privacy mandates for U.S. financial institutions. Option C. Relying on a generic cloud migration checklist that addresses common IT infrastructure impacts, without a specific deep dive into the regulatory nuances of U.S. financial services data handling and residency. Option D. Focusing primarily on the performance benchmarks and cost optimization features of VMware Cloud on AWS, assuming that general cloud compliance standards will automatically cover the specific needs of U.S. financial services. The correct answer is A. Thoroughly evaluating the specific data residency options and compliance certifications offered by VMware Cloud on AWS, and mapping these directly against the relevant U.S. financial services regulations, e.g., GLBA, state-specific data privacy laws, and the organization's data classification policies. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in cloud adoption projects where the impact assessment phase must consider the specific regulatory landscape governing VMware Cloud on AWS deployments. The professional challenge lies in accurately identifying and prioritizing potential impacts, especially those related to data residency, compliance frameworks, and service-level agreements, SLAs, that are critical for regulated industries. Misinterpreting or overlooking these factors can lead to significant compliance breaches, financial penalties, and reputational damage. The need for deep understanding of both VMware Cloud on AWS capabilities and the applicable regulatory requirements is paramount. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a comprehensive review of the VMware Cloud on AWS service, offering against the specific regulatory requirements applicable to the organization's industry and geographic location. This includes scrutinizing the data residency options provided by VMware Cloud on AWS, understanding the shared responsibility model for compliance, and verifying that the chosen deployment model aligns with any mandated certifications or attestations, e.g., SOC 2, ISO 27001, HIPAA, GDPR, depending on the jurisdiction. It also entails assessing how VMware Cloud on AWS's operational model and disaster recovery capabilities meet the organization's business continuity and resilience needs, which are often dictated by regulatory mandates. This approach ensures that the deployment not only meets technical requirements, but also adheres to all legal and compliance obligations, representing best professional practice by proactively mitigating risks. Incorrect approaches analysis. Focusing solely on the technical capabilities of VMware Cloud on AWS without cross-referencing specific regulatory mandates is a significant ethical and regulatory failure. This oversight can lead to deploying a solution that technically functions but fails to meet critical compliance obligations, such as data sovereignty laws or industry-specific data handling requirements. Prioritizing cost savings and performance improvements above all else, without a thorough assessment of regulatory implications, is another critical failure. While cost and performance are important considerations, they must not supersede the legal and ethical obligations to protect sensitive data and maintain compliance. This approach risks non-compliance, leading to severe penalties and loss of trust. Adopting a generic cloud compliance checklist that is not tailored to the specific nuances of VMware Cloud on AWS and the organization's unique regulatory environment is also professionally unacceptable. Generic checklists may miss critical details related to the shared responsibility model, specific VMware Cloud on AWS security controls, or the particular compliance frameworks relevant to the organization's operations. This can result in a false sense of security and undetected compliance gaps. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a risk-based approach to impact assessment for VMware Cloud on AWS. This involves 1. Identifying all applicable regulatory frameworks and compliance obligations relevant to the organization's operations and data. 2. Thoroughly understanding the capabilities and limitations of VMware Cloud on AWS, particularly concerning data residency, security controls, and operational resilience. 3. Mapping the organization's regulatory requirements to the features and responsibilities within the VMware Cloud on AWS shared responsibility model. 4. Prioritizing potential impacts based on their severity and likelihood, with a strong emphasis on compliance and data protection risks. 5. Documenting the assessment findings and proposed mitigation strategies, ensuring transparency and accountability. 6. Regularly reviewing and updating the impact assessment as the regulatory landscape or the VMware Cloud on AWS service evolves. Question 14. Implementation of a critical business application on VMware Cloud on AWS has led to user-reported performance degradation. From a stakeholder perspective, what is the most appropriate initial approach to diagnose and resolve these performance issues? Option A. Focus exclusively on optimizing network connectivity between the on-premises data center and VMware Cloud on AWS, assuming this is the primary driver of performance issues. Option B. Immediately revert the application to the on-premises environment to restore perceived performance, while a separate, less urgent investigation into the cloud environment is initiated. Option C. Implement aggressive, unverified configuration tuning within the VMware Cloud on AWS environment based on common performance best practices to quickly address stakeholder concerns. Option D. Conduct a comprehensive performance analysis of the application within the VMware Cloud on AWS environment, correlating application metrics with VMware Cloud on AWS and underlying AWS infrastructure performance data to identify bottlenecks. The correct answer is D. Conduct a comprehensive performance analysis of the application within the VMware Cloud on AWS environment, correlating application metrics with VMware Cloud on AWS and underlying AWS infrastructure performance data to identify bottlenecks. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in cloud adoption projects where a critical business application's performance is perceived to be degraded after migration to VMware Cloud on AWS. The challenge lies in attributing the performance issue accurately. Is it a fundamental architectural flaw in the application, a misconfiguration within the VMware Cloud on AWS environment, a network latency issue between on-premises and cloud resources, or an issue with the underlying AWS infrastructure? Stakeholders, particularly the business unit, will likely attribute any perceived performance degradation directly to the migration, demanding immediate resolution and potentially questioning the value of the investment. This requires a systematic, data-driven approach to diagnose the root cause without succumbing to pressure for a quick, potentially incorrect fix. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a phased, evidence-based investigation that begins with validating the application's performance baseline, and then systematically examining each layer of the VMware Cloud on AWS stack and its integration points. This aligns with best practices for troubleshooting complex distributed systems and adheres to the principle of due diligence expected in managing cloud environments. It prioritizes understanding the actual behavior of the application and the underlying infrastructure before making any changes. This methodical approach ensures that any remediation efforts are targeted and effective, minimizing further disruption and demonstrating responsible management of the cloud service. It also supports the auditability of the resolution process, which is crucial for compliance and accountability. Incorrect approaches analysis. Reverting the application to the on-premises environment without a thorough investigation is a premature and potentially costly decision. This approach fails to address the root cause, which might lie within the VMware cloud on AWS environment or its integration, and negates the benefits of the cloud migration. It also represents a failure to adequately troubleshoot and manage the deployed solution, potentially violating service-level agreements and demonstrating a lack of professional competence in cloud operations. Implementing immediate, unverified configuration changes within VMware Cloud on AWS based on anecdotal evidence or stakeholder pressure is also professionally unsound. This shotgun approach risks introducing new problems, exacerbating existing ones, and making root cause analysis more difficult. It bypasses the critical step of data collection and analysis, leading to inefficient resource utilization and potential compliance breaches if changes are not properly documented and approved. Focusing solely on network latency between on-premises and VMware Cloud on AWS, without considering application-specific factors or internal VMware Cloud on AWS performance metrics, is an incomplete diagnostic. While network latency can be a factor, it is rarely the sole cause of application performance degradation. This narrow focus can lead to misdiagnosis and wasted effort on optimizing a component that is not the primary bottleneck. Professional reasoning. Professionals faced with such a scenario should adopt a structured problem-solving methodology. This involves 1. Clearly defining the problem and its impact, gathering initial stakeholder input. 2. Establishing a performance baseline for the application in its current state. 3. Formulating hypotheses about potential root causes. 4. Systematically testing these hypotheses using monitoring tools, logs, and performance metrics across the application, VMware Cloud on AWS, and underlying AWS infrastructure. 5. Implementing targeted remediation based on validated findings. 6. Verifying the effectiveness of the remediation and documenting the entire process. This data-driven, iterative approach ensures that decisions are informed, efficient, and aligned with best practices for managing complex cloud environments. Question 15. The evaluation methodology shows that a comprehensive impact assessment for a VMware Cloud on AWS deployment must consider the specific regulatory obligations related to data handling and security. Which of the following assessment strategies best aligns with these requirements? Option A. A detailed analysis of how VMware Cloud on AWS services map to existing data residency, privacy, and security regulations, identifying any potential compliance gaps and proposing specific mitigation controls. Option B. A high-level review of general cloud security principles to ensure the deployment adheres to industry best practices, assuming the cloud provider handles all regulatory compliance. Option C. A complete reliance on the VMware Cloud on AWS provider's standard compliance documentation, without conducting an independent assessment of the organization's specific data and workload requirements. Option D. An assessment focused primarily on the potential cost efficiencies and operational agility gained by migrating to VMware Cloud on AWS, with compliance considerations addressed only if explicitly flagged by the provider. The correct answer is A. A detailed analysis of how VMware Cloud on AWS services map to existing data residency, privacy, and security regulations, identifying any potential compliance gaps and proposing specific mitigation controls. Explanation. The scenario presents a common challenge in cloud adoption, balancing the perceived benefits of a new technology with the inherent risks and compliance obligations. For VMware Cloud on AWS, this involves understanding the shared responsibility model and how it impacts data residency, security, and operational compliance within the specific regulatory landscape applicable to the exam's jurisdiction. The professional challenge lies in ensuring that the impact assessment is comprehensive, accurate, and aligns with both business objectives and regulatory mandates, rather than being a superficial exercise. The correct approach emphasizes a thorough, risk-based impact assessment that directly addresses the specific requirements of VMware Cloud on AWS within the relevant regulatory framework. This involves identifying all potential impacts on data privacy, security controls, operational continuity, and regulatory adherence. By proactively identifying and mitigating risks, this approach ensures that the deployment is compliant from the outset and minimizes potential future liabilities. This aligns with best professional practice by prioritizing due diligence and a proactive stance on compliance, which is a cornerstone of responsible technology adoption and risk management. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on the cost savings of migrating to VMware Cloud on AWS without a commensurate assessment of compliance implications fails to acknowledge the shared responsibility model. This can lead to regulatory breaches if data residency requirements are not met or if security controls are not adequately mapped to the cloud environment. Another incorrect approach that relies on generic cloud security best practices without tailoring them to the specific VMware Cloud on AWS architecture and the applicable regulatory framework is also problematic. This can result in gaps in compliance, as specific regulatory nuances might be overlooked. A third incorrect approach that delegates the entire impact assessment to the cloud provider without independent verification or internal validation is a significant ethical and professional failure. It abdicates responsibility for compliance, which ultimately rests with the organization deploying the service. Professionals should adopt a decision-making process that begins with a clear understanding of the regulatory obligations relevant to the data and workloads being migrated. This should be followed by a detailed mapping of these obligations to the capabilities and responsibilities within the VMware Cloud on AWS environment. The impact assessment should then systematically identify potential deviations or gaps, followed by the development of mitigation strategies. Regular review and validation of the assessment and mitigation plans are crucial to ensure ongoing compliance and to adapt to any changes in the regulatory landscape or the cloud service itself. Question 16. Assessment of the potential impact of migrating existing on-premises VMware vSphere environments to VMware Cloud on AWS, considering technical feasibility, operational changes, financial implications, and security and compliance considerations within the 5v0-11/21 regulatory framework. Option A. Conduct a comprehensive impact assessment encompassing technical compatibility, operational workflow adjustments, detailed financial projections including TCO and ROI, and a thorough review of security controls and compliance requirements specific to VMware Cloud on AWS. Option B. Evaluate the migration solely from a technical perspective, assessing infrastructure compatibility but neglecting the financial viability, operational readiness, and critical security and compliance aspects. Option C. Focus primarily on the potential for immediate cost reduction by decommissioning on-premises hardware, without a detailed analysis of ongoing cloud operational costs or potential integration complexities. Option D. Prioritize the adoption of new VMware Cloud on AWS features and functionalities, assuming seamless integration and overlooking potential performance bottlenecks or the need for extensive re-architecting of existing applications. The correct answer is A. Conduct a comprehensive impact assessment encompassing technical compatibility, operational workflow adjustments, detailed financial projections including TCO and ROI, and a thorough review of security controls and compliance requirements specific to VMware Cloud on AWS. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent complexity of assessing the impact of a significant technological shift like migrating to VMware Cloud on AWS. The challenge lies in accurately forecasting and quantifying the potential benefits and risks across various organizational dimensions: technical, operational, financial, and security, while adhering to the specific regulatory framework governing VMware Cloud on AWS deployments. The need for a comprehensive and objective impact assessment is paramount to ensure informed decision-making, resource allocation, and risk mitigation, all within the confines of the 5v0-11/21 21. Exams jurisdiction. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a multifaceted impact assessment that systematically evaluates the technical implications of the migration, including infrastructure compatibility, performance tuning, and integration with existing on-premises or other cloud environments. It also necessitates a thorough operational analysis, examining changes to IT service management, disaster recovery, and business continuity plans. Furthermore, a robust financial assessment is crucial, covering not only direct migration costs, but also ongoing operational expenses, potential cost savings, and return on investment. Finally, a comprehensive security and compliance review is essential, ensuring adherence to all relevant VMware Cloud on AWS specific security controls and regulatory requirements. This holistic approach ensures that all potential consequences, both positive and negative, are identified and understood, enabling strategic planning and risk management aligned with best practices for cloud adoption. Incorrect approach is analysis, focusing solely on the immediate cost savings of migrating to VMware Cloud on AWS, while ignoring potential increases in operational complexity or the need for specialized skill sets, represents a significant regulatory and ethical failure. It leads to an incomplete picture of the true financial impact and can result in under-budgeting and unexpected expenses, violating principles of responsible financial management. Prioritizing only the perceived technical benefits of new features without a thorough assessment of integration challenges and potential performance degradation is also professionally unacceptable. This oversight can lead to operational disruptions, system instability, and failure to meet service-level agreements, contravening the duty to maintain reliable IT services. Neglecting the security and compliance implications of moving sensitive data to a cloud environment without a detailed review of VMware Cloud on AWS-specific security postures and regulatory adherence is a critical ethical and regulatory lapse. This can expose the organization to data breaches, non-compliance penalties, and reputational damage. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a structured, phased approach to impact assessment. This begins with clearly defining the scope and objectives of the migration. Subsequently, a detailed inventory of existing systems and applications is performed, followed by an analysis of their compatibility and suitability for VMware Cloud on AWS. Stakeholder engagement across IT, finance, security, and business units is critical to gather diverse perspectives and identify all potential impacts. The assessment should then quantify these impacts using appropriate metrics, considering both tangible and intangible factors. Finally, a risk assessment and mitigation plan should be developed, outlining strategies to address identified risks and maximize the benefits of the migration. This systematic process ensures that decisions are data-driven, compliant, and aligned with organizational goals. Question 17. Comparative studies suggest that organizations often underestimate the regulatory implications of migrating to hybrid cloud environments. When planning a migration of sensitive customer data to VMware Cloud on AWS, what is the most critical component of an impact assessment to ensure ongoing compliance with data protection and privacy regulations? Option A. A detailed technical evaluation of the network latency and bandwidth performance between the on-premises data center and the VMware Cloud on AWS environment to ensure optimal application performance post-migration. Option B. A thorough mapping of existing on-premises data governance policies and controls to the specific security and compliance features offered by VMware Cloud on AWS, identifying any gaps that require remediation before or during the migration. Option C. An assumption that VMware Cloud on AWS, being a managed service, inherently meets all regulatory compliance requirements for the customer's specific data types and workloads. Option D. A focus solely on the cost savings and operational efficiencies gained from migrating to VMware Cloud on AWS, with compliance considerations being a secondary concern addressed after the migration is complete. Correct answer is B. A thorough mapping of existing on-premises data governance policies and controls to the specific security and compliance features offered by VMware Cloud on AWS, identifying any gaps that require remediation before or during the migration. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent complexity of assessing the impact of a significant infrastructure change, like migrating to VMware Cloud on AWS, on an organization's existing compliance posture. The challenge lies in identifying all potential compliance touchpoints across various regulatory domains and ensuring that the new cloud environment not only meets but potentially enhances the organization's ability to adhere to these regulations. A superficial assessment risks overlooking critical vulnerabilities, leading to non-compliance, potential fines, and reputational damage. The need for deep technical understanding of both on-premises VMware environments and the specific constructs of VMware Cloud on AWS, coupled with a thorough grasp of relevant regulatory frameworks, makes this a demanding task. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a comprehensive, multifaceted impact assessment that systematically evaluates the proposed VMware Cloud on AWS migration against all applicable regulatory requirements. This includes identifying data residency obligations, data protection controls e.g., encryption, access management, audit logging capabilities, incident response procedures, and vendor risk management. It necessitates engaging with legal, compliance, and security teams to ensure all regulatory nuances are considered. Best professional practice dictates a proactive, documented approach that maps existing controls to new cloud-based controls and identifies any gaps. This aligns with the principle of due diligence and demonstrates a commitment to maintaining regulatory compliance throughout the migration and operational phases. For instance, if the organization handles sensitive financial data, the assessment must verify that VMware Cloud on AWS configurations and operational procedures meet standards like PCI DSS or relevant financial regulations within the specified jurisdiction. Incorrect approach is analysis, focusing solely on the technical migration aspects without a parallel, rigorous compliance impact assessment is a significant regulatory and ethical failure. This approach ignores the fundamental requirement to maintain regulatory adherence, potentially leading to breaches of data privacy laws, industry-specific regulations, or contractual obligations. It represents a failure of due diligence and a disregard for the organization's legal responsibilities. Another incorrect approach is to assume that because VMware Cloud on AWS is a managed service, it automatically inherits all necessary compliance certifications. While VMware Cloud on AWS offers robust security and compliance features, the customer retains responsibility for configuring and managing their workloads within the cloud environment to meet specific regulatory needs. Relying solely on vendor certifications without a tailored impact assessment for the specific use case and data types is a critical oversight and a failure to conduct a proper risk assessment. A third incorrect approach is to delegate the entire compliance impact assessment to the IT or cloud engineering team, without involving legal and compliance subject matter experts. This siloed approach can lead to a lack of understanding of the legal implications and the specific requirements of various regulations, resulting in an incomplete or inaccurate assessment. It fails to integrate the necessary legal and business context into the technical evaluation, creating a significant compliance risk. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a structured, risk-based approach to impact assessments for cloud migrations. This involves 1. Defining the scope. Clearly identify all regulatory frameworks applicable to the organization's data and operations. 2. Inventorying assets and data. Understand what data will be migrated and its sensitivity. 3. Mapping controls. Document existing on-premises controls and map them to the proposed VMware Cloud on AWS environment. 4. Gap analysis. Identify any discrepancies between existing controls and regulatory requirements in the cloud. 5. Risk assessment. Evaluate the likelihood and impact of identified gaps. 6. Mitigation planning. Develop strategies to address identified risks and close compliance gaps. 7. Documentation and review. Maintain thorough records of the assessment and obtain sign-off from relevant stakeholders, including legal and compliance. 8. Continuous monitoring. Establish processes for ongoing monitoring and reassessment as regulations and the cloud environment evolve. Question 18. Risk assessment procedures indicate that a financial services firm is planning to migrate its core trading platforms to VMware Cloud on AWS. Which of the following approaches best ensures compliance with U.S. federal financial regulations regarding data protection and operational resilience during this migration? Option A. Proceeding with a direct lift and shift migration of existing on-premises infrastructure to VMware Cloud on AWS, assuming current security configurations will suffice. Option B. Conducting a thorough impact assessment that maps data flows, evaluates existing and new controls against regulatory requirements, and updates business continuity plans for the cloud environment. Option C. Focusing exclusively on the technical aspects of migrating the trading platforms, assuming that VMware's inherent cloud security features will automatically satisfy all regulatory obligations. Option D. Prioritizing the lowest cost migration strategy, with a secondary focus on technical performance and deferring detailed regulatory review until after the migration is complete. The correct answer is B. Conducting a thorough impact assessment that maps data flows, evaluates existing and new controls against regulatory requirements, and updates business continuity plans for the cloud environment. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires evaluating the impact of a significant change, migration to VMware Cloud on AWS, on existing business processes and regulatory compliance. The challenge lies in ensuring that the new cloud environment not only meets technical requirements, but also adheres to the specific regulatory framework applicable to the organization, which in this exam's context is assumed to be U.S. federal regulations governing financial services data handling. A failure to adequately assess the impact could lead to non-compliance, data breaches, operational disruptions, and reputational damage. The complexity arises from the shared responsibility model in cloud environments and the need to understand how VMware Cloud on AWS integrates with existing on-premises controls and data flows. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a comprehensive impact assessment that specifically considers the regulatory requirements for data protection, privacy, and operational resilience as mandated by relevant U.S. federal financial regulations. This includes identifying all sensitive data, mapping its flow within the VMware Cloud on AWS environment, and evaluating the controls implemented by both VMware and the organization to ensure compliance with regulations such as those from the SEC, FINRA, or OC, depending on the specific financial services sector. The assessment must also consider the implications for business continuity and disaster recovery plans in the context of the new cloud infrastructure. This aligns with the principle of due diligence and risk management expected of financial institutions operating in regulated environments. Incorrect approaches analysis, focusing solely on technical migration feasibility without a corresponding regulatory impact assessment, is a significant ethical and regulatory failure. This approach ignores the legal obligations to protect customer data and maintain operational integrity, potentially leading to violations of data privacy laws and financial regulations. Prioritizing cost savings above all other considerations, including regulatory compliance and security, is also a critical failure. While cost efficiency is important, it cannot supersede the legal and ethical mandates to protect sensitive information and ensure the stability of financial operations. This can lead to the implementation of inadequate controls, increasing the risk of breaches and non-compliance. Adopting a lift and shift approach without a thorough review of how existing on-premises security and compliance controls translate to the VMware Cloud on AWS environment is another failure. This assumes that existing controls are automatically effective in the new environment, which is rarely the case. It overlooks the nuances of cloud security and the shared responsibility model, potentially leaving critical gaps in compliance and security posture. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a risk-based approach to impact assessment for cloud migrations. This involves 1. Identifying all applicable regulatory requirements relevant to the organization's industry and data types. 2. Mapping current data flows and business processes. 3. Evaluating how these will be affected by the migration to VMware Cloud on AWS, paying close attention to data residency, access controls, encryption, and audit logging. 4. Assessing the security and compliance capabilities of VMware Cloud on AWS and identifying any gaps that need to be addressed through additional controls or configurations. 5. Updating business continuity and disaster recovery plans to reflect the new cloud environment. 6. Documenting the entire assessment process and the resulting mitigation strategies to demonstrate due diligence to regulators. Question 19. To address the challenge of migrating a critical financial reporting application to VMware Cloud on AWS, which handles personally identifiable information, PI, and is subject to specific data processing regulations within the jurisdiction, what is the most appropriate initial step in the impact assessment process? Option A. Prioritize the assessment based on the perceived technical complexity of the migration, addressing the most challenging aspects first to ensure a smooth technical transition. Option B. Develop a high-level project plan for the migration, outlining key milestones and resource allocation, and then initiate the impact assessment based on this plan. Option C. Engage legal and compliance teams to identify all applicable regulatory requirements pertaining to PII processing and data residency, and then map these to the capabilities and limitations of VMware Cloud on AWS. Option D. Conduct a comprehensive review of the application's technical architecture and identify potential integration points with VMware Cloud on AWS services, focusing on performance and scalability. The correct answer is D. Conduct a comprehensive review of the application's technical architecture and identify potential integration points with VMware Cloud on AWS services, focusing on performance and scalability. Explanation. The scenario presents a common challenge in cloud adoption, ensuring that the migration of sensitive workloads to VMware Cloud on AWS aligns with the organization's established impact assessment framework and regulatory obligations. The professional challenge lies in balancing the agility and benefits of cloud with the imperative of maintaining compliance and security posture, particularly when dealing with data that may be subject to specific data residency or processing requirements. Careful judgment is required to ensure that the impact assessment is comprehensive, accurate, and actionable, rather than a mere procedural checkbox. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it directly addresses the core tenets of a robust impact assessment process. By involving stakeholders from relevant departments, including legal, compliance, and security, the assessment ensures that all potential risks and regulatory implications are identified and evaluated from multiple perspectives. This collaborative approach facilitates a thorough understanding of the data's sensitivity, the applicable regulatory landscape within the specified jurisdiction, and the security controls required within VMware Cloud on AWS. The outcome is a well-informed decision regarding the suitability of the cloud environment for the specific workload and the implementation of necessary mitigation strategies, thereby upholding the organization's duty of care and compliance obligations. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on technical feasibility without considering regulatory compliance would fail to meet the professional standard. This oversight could lead to a violation of data protection laws or industry-specific regulations, resulting in significant fines, reputational damage, and loss of customer trust. Another incorrect approach that prioritizes speed of migration over thoroughness of assessment risks, overlooking critical security vulnerabilities or compliance gaps. This haste can expose the organization to data breaches or non-compliance issues that are far more costly and time-consuming to rectify than a properly conducted initial assessment. A third incorrect approach that relies on generic cloud security best practices without tailoring them to the specific regulatory requirements of the jurisdiction would be insufficient. This generic approach might not adequately address unique local mandates, leading to potential non-compliance. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a clear understanding of the regulatory landscape applicable to the data and workload. This is followed by a comprehensive identification of all potential impacts, including technical, operational, security, and regulatory. Engaging a diverse group of stakeholders ensures a holistic view. The assessment should then systematically evaluate these impacts against established risk tolerance levels and regulatory requirements. Finally, the framework dictates that mitigation strategies and controls are defined and implemented before proceeding with the migration, with ongoing monitoring and review. Question 20. Compliance review shows that a financial services client is migrating sensitive customer transaction data to VMware Cloud on AWS. The organization has selected a VMware Cloud on AWS region based primarily on its proximity to their on-premises data centers for reduced latency. Without a detailed assessment of the specific data residency requirements for this type of financial data under applicable U.S. regulations, what is the most appropriate course of action to ensure regulatory compliance? Option A. Proceed with the migration as planned, assuming that VMware Cloud on AWS, being a reputable service, inherently meets all necessary data residency requirements for financial data. Option B. Immediately halt the migration and conduct a comprehensive review to confirm the selected VMware Cloud on AWS region aligns with all applicable U.S. data residency laws and contractual obligations for financial transaction data, engaging legal and compliance teams to validate the findings. Option C. Reconfigure the network to route all sensitive transaction data through a secure tunnel to an on-premises data center for processing, even though this significantly increases latency and operational complexity. Option D. Rely on VMware's general compliance documentation for their cloud services, which states adherence to broad data protection principles, without performing a specific validation for the chosen region and data type. Correct answer is B. Immediately halt the migration and conduct a comprehensive review to confirm the selected VMware Cloud on AWS region aligns with all applicable U.S. data residency laws and contractual obligations for financial transaction data, engaging legal and compliance teams to validate the findings. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge related to data residency and compliance within the context of VMware Cloud on AWS. The core difficulty lies in balancing the operational benefits of a global cloud infrastructure with the stringent regulatory requirements that may dictate where sensitive customer data can reside. The organization must ensure that its deployment of VMware Cloud on AWS adheres to all applicable data protection laws and contractual obligations, which can be complex given the distributed nature of cloud services. Misinterpreting or overlooking these requirements can lead to significant legal, financial, and reputational damage. Careful judgment is required to assess the implications of data processing locations and to implement appropriate controls. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a thorough understanding and application of the data residency requirements as stipulated by the relevant regulatory framework for the exam's jurisdiction, which is assumed to be U.S.-based for this context, given the lack of specific mention of other jurisdictions and the commonality of such exams. This means verifying that the chosen VMware Cloud on AWS region align with the data residency mandates for the specific types of customer data being processed. This includes confirming that the data remains within the designated geographical boundaries, or that any cross-border data transfers are conducted in compliance with legal mechanisms like data processing agreements that meet regulatory standards. This approach represents best professional practice because it directly addresses the legal and regulatory obligations, ensuring data protection and avoiding noncompliance penalties. It demonstrates a proactive and diligent stance in managing cloud deployments within a regulated environment. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach is to assume that all VMware Cloud on AWS regions are inherently compliant with all data residency regulations without explicit verification. This is a failure to exercise due diligence and can lead to regulatory violations if the chosen region does not meet specific data localization requirements. Another incorrect approach is to prioritize cost savings or performance benefits over data residency mandates. While these factors are important, they must not supersede legal and regulatory compliance. Failing to do so constitutes a breach of professional responsibility and can result in severe penalties. A third incorrect approach is to rely solely on VMware's general compliance statements without conducting an independent assessment of how the specific deployment configuration meets the organization's unique data residency obligations. This can be a failure to adequately assess risk and ensure that the service is configured to meet specific regulatory needs. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a risk-based approach to cloud deployments. This involves identifying all applicable regulations, understanding their implications for data residency, and then mapping these requirements to the capabilities and geographical offerings of cloud services like VMware Cloud on AWS. A critical step is to engage with legal and compliance teams to interpret regulatory nuances and to obtain explicit confirmation that the chosen deployment strategy meets all mandates. Regular audits and ongoing monitoring are essential to ensure continued compliance as regulations and service offerings evolve.